Hello, and welcome to this edition of Criminal Justice Natters with me, Ed Johnston. Today we're joined by Kathleen Zellner, who is Stephen Avery's counsel and representation in terms of his pursuit for justice regarding his wrongful conviction involving Teresa Halbach. We cover a lot of stuff concerning the Avery case, criminal justice in general, as well as Kathleen's journey into criminal law and focusing on wrongful convictions. I hope you enjoy the show. And if you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch through social media or email. I'll put all the details at the end of this show. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Kathleen. Thank you very much for joining us today. There's been a lot of anticipation on social media about this interview. So I do have some questions to get into. If you're happy to start, we will start.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Proceed.
How did you get into criminal law?
It started when I got into criminal law. My first introduction was when I clerked for an appellate judge. And so he had a combination of criminal and civil cases. But the 2 years that I was with him, we had some very big and complex criminal cases. And I found the constitutional issues really interesting. So that was my first introduction.
And is that something that's just sort of stayed with you forever after that introduction?
Yes, because I've been fortunate in that I've been able to combine a civil and a criminal law practice. So I worked for an attorney that had done the same thing, that had primarily criminal cases, but some civil cases. And then I was trained at a large Chicago law firm in professional malpractice. So I was defending doctors and lawyers from malpractice suits. And then I ended up going back into my current practice, starting my own law firm.
I see. And has the someone from social media has asked, Wolf Ryan has asked, has the allure of working in wrongful convictions, was that always there? Was that always the plan?
No, because actually, when I started, there were no such thing as wrongful convictions. The first wrongful conviction case in Illinois was about 1990. I wasn't involved in that, and I started my firm in 1990. So, no, that area of law has developed after I started my firm.
I see. Um, and just we have a lot of students that watch these sort of vlogs. What would be your best piece of advice you could give to a student who was looking to pursue a career in criminal defense?
Well, I think my general advice to all students starting the practice of law is you must have experience in a number of different areas of law to understand what you want to do. The great thing about working for a judge after law school, where you're actually writing the opinions, is you're exposed to a wide variety of cases. So everything from security law to medical malpractice to criminal law. And that's but I firmly believe, part of the reason I've been successful is I've been on both sides of the table. I've worked as a criminal defense attorney. I was never a prosecutor, but I was a civil defense attorney before I became a plaintiff, which is more analogous to being a prosecutor. So the key thing, you can never evolve into a really well-rounded attorney if you do not have that background. I also had the background of doing trials and appellate work. So most people, when they get out, or many attorneys, I think, make the mistake of just getting in a niche area, and they never fully develop a perspective on all the common areas between these different specialized practices.
Thank you. If we could move on to the sort of Stephen Avery case in the Netflix Making a Murderer documentary. How is Stephen doing right now?
Stephen is doing well, all things considered. I think I think the weight and, just everything that he's been through, that it's very wearing on him. But he's a remarkably resilient person. For example, 8 or 9 months ago, he got the COVID virus and he recovered
Right.
from that. He's very mentally tough. In fact, we did some testing of him, post traumatic testing of him, and found that he is one of those people that gets stronger as a result of trauma.
Oh, that's excellent to hear. How does he? This is a question for me. How does he simply keep going with everything that he's experienced in his life in the criminal justice system?
I mean, I've asked him the same question, like how does he persevere? There's a couple components to it. One is his connection with his parents, because he believes that he has his strongest desire and goal is to get out and take care of his parents. So that keeps him going. The second thing is because he's innocent, he does not want to succumb to giving up or in any way conceding anything that would indicate that he was guilty. And so that's really what sustains him. But he's in a rare category. I mean, there's very few people, if any, that have been convicted twice, wrongly
Mm,
convicted twice. So there isn't anyone he can consult with. I try to have, weekly contact with him, but and the other thing that I notice about his personality is his sense of humor. That's the other thing that seems to sustain him. So he enjoys just kidding around and, um, talking about how ludicrous a lot of times the judicial system is, that it makes no sense to someone, just a common man. It makes no sense to them.
no. In terms, as a follow-up to that one, in terms of his parents and drawing strength from his parents, how are his parents coping?
Well, neither of his parents enjoy particularly good health. They both declined significantly, from the airing of the first season to now. So, his mother's been in and out of the hospital, and his father's got some health problems, but seems to be pretty self-sufficient. They're aging. It's kind of touch and go, with both of them.
Mm,
But I believe they have persevered in that he keeps them alive, the hope that he'll be freed.
yeah. In terms of the Netflix show or the documentary, how was it? How did you find being followed by the film crew when obviously you've got a very complex and difficult job and having a film crew present?
Well, I had agreed to do that, so I really allowed them to have a window into the process, and with that came a risk of, just flubbing it or, you know, in some way inadvertently discovering or uncovering incriminating evidence. But fortunately, this case came along at a point in my career where I have had so much experience with innocent people and the struggle that you go through, that I knew that none of those things would happen because he was innocent. I knew that no matter how many tests I did and what I subjected him to, or the forensic evidence, there was nothing that would backfire. There was nothing that would show that I was wrong about his innocence.
And in terms of when this came along in the sort of point of your career that you're at, can you tell us a little bit maybe about your most memorable case you've had in terms of miscarriages of justice?
Yes, in fact, I was just filming this week with 2020 ABC on a case that I had in 2004, the Kevin Fox case. And that was, reliving that this week, I realized what a traumatic but exhilarating experience that was, because Kevin Fox had a 3-year-old daughter that was kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and murdered. And he gave a confession to all of the above. And
Wow.
so and he was charged with the death penalty. The case occurred during an election year when the state's attorney was running for reelection. Fortunately, he lost. And we were able and it was just such a long shot that there would be any DNA. There was saliva in the child's vagina, despite the fact he'd been drowned in a creek. And so we were able to get a YSTR profile, get him released. That was the beginning of the battle as we worked our way through federal court, through the civil part of the case. And this is what I'm talking about, of combining, criminal and civil, and having the experience to be able to walk into a civil courtroom and present a criminal case that's been botched. And so that struggle took place from 2004 until 2010. And it was before, people were scanning documents and all of that. And so we went over and retrieved 50 boxes from the case, 50 banker boxes. And we were reviewing those for the film crew and of course, the parents, and the horror of the whole case just comes back. And you remember what that was like, and the feeling at certain points that it was impossible to win it.
Yeah. And so did Kevin Fox serve 6 years in prison from '04 to 2010 for something he didn't
Actually,
do?
he was released. Excuse me. He was released much earlier on the DNA, but people still believed that he committed the murder, and he had confessed to it. And so the civil rights trial was an arduous task. But amazingly, even though we had a partial YSTR profile, by the intense focus on the case after the civil rights, and it was the biggest civil rights verdict in the United States for the amount of time he was in prison, they caught the real killer. They were able to get a confession and link the DNA to the real killer. So the case was the trifecta of wrongful
Yeah.
conviction, because we got, the person wrongly accused and charged out of prison. We won a huge civil rights verdict, and we were able to expose the wrongdoing. And then, the most important thing is the real killer was caught, confessed, and got life in prison. And yet, when I was reviewing those boxes, I could feel the weight of the whole case again, the times where I thought, this is just not possible. This, we're not going to get the DNA. The child was in water. Um, it's a hopeless task,
Hmm.
even though he's innocent.
And is that trifecta rare in your experience?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. We've been fortunate. About half of our case, the evidence we've developed has led to the apprehension and prosecution of the real killers, um, which I have to say, it always feels incomplete, even when the innocent person gets out of prison. Um, it always feels incomplete. And so um, that's been a very motivating factor in the work that I've done, is to get the real person held accountable.
Yeah. And that sounds like a really good hit rate. That sort of half the time. Um, Another question sort of linked on to how this would impact your sort of personal life I've had from students is how do you park this at the end of the day? If you have a case like Kevin Fox or Stephen Avery, how do you eat dinner and enjoy a glass of wine and watch television?
Right. You do have to learn to compartmentalize, but I've realized, and it's been in retrospect that I've realized, it does take a toll on you being exposed to so much tragedy, you know, such high stakes in these cases. And yet, I think I've grown stronger with it. But you have to make a concerted effort in your personal life not to have it dominate everything you're doing. I know my daughter was saying, when I worked on Kevin Fox, it was like she felt like she'd lost her mother, that I just wasn't.
Hmm.
I got better with that as time went on, but I think it's a cautionary tale about, part of what makes you effective as an attorney, makes you win, and all of that, is it becomes all consuming.
Yeah.
But there's a price that you pay for that. So you do want to have that balance in your life.
Yeah. And in terms of trying to strike this balance, when you're dealing with cases like the Fox case or the Avery case, are you talking 12-hour days, 14-hour days?
It's almost like you can't even separate it into hours. You are thinking about it every other minute. So
Yeah.
even even if you're not sitting, preparing the document or reviewing something, it stays present with you. So you'll be in a situation where you'll see a child, or you'll see a family. So you're coping. And what I've realized, because I'm working a lot with forensic psychologists, is they now know that post-traumatic stress, if you're a witness to someone's stress, that it's infectious.
Yeah.
And so I do feel in some of those cases, particularly the one with the child Riley Fox, that we all that worked on, everyone had post-traumatic stress from working on that. Um, and I realized that when we were filming this week. That show's going to air at the end of April, but it's a good microcosm for somebody to look at, that would consider this type of work, and
Yes.
the journey that you go on with the families, because you become a family member to them, and you're their lifeline, you know.
Yeah. And in terms of sort of televising these cases in these journeys, do you think there's any sort of net benefit to the wider public who may not have an interest in criminal justice?
I do, because I think it's like a Shakespearean tale. It's a tale of life, because everyone's life has components of, great joy and then great sadness. And death is an inevitable factor in everyone's life. So I do think, and it's interesting with this program that's coming out on 2020, the mother was the one who really wanted the story retold in its entirety. Um, because I think people that are wrongfully convicted and their families never feel fully exonerated in the public eye. And the message that she articulated, that I thought was so important and such a teachable kind of concept, is she was saying if she had to advise or make a statement about the case, it would be to tell people, don't judge things you don't understand. You haven't been in the shoes of a parent that's lost their child, to understand why a father would confess to it. Don't be so
Mhm.
quick to judge people, because their lives are turned upside down. And you can think on social media, I mean, I've done the same thing myself. You can think that you understand and all that, but you're not really totally evaluating all of the evidence, and you have no understanding of the emotions that are going on with people.
And in terms of Riley Fox's mother, this isn't a case that I'm familiar with. Did she support Kevin Fox through this, or
Yes, it was
yeah?
amazing. She never wavered, and it was a huge factor. I mean, the DNA cleared him on the criminal case, but it was an enormous factor in the public perception, but most importantly in the civil rights trial, because they did not stay married. They divorced.
Mhm.
But it wasn't because she doubted him. She was the strongest advocate
Wow.
that he was such a great father, and that there's no possible way he could have ever hurt the child. And so, I say I have a group of plaintiffs I've represented that tell my new law clerks they rise to the level of being heroic.
Yeah.
She's one of those people.
Wow. That's fascinating, and I must admit I'm kind of taken aback by that support as well from the sort of
Yes.
nutshell case. In terms of Stephen's case, is there a time frame, or what are the next steps in terms of Stephen?
So the situation that we're in the state court system, not the federal. But interestingly, we have a much better chance with the state court than the federal, because of the federal statute, the statute, that makes it so impossible to win in federal court. So wrongful convictions are most likely to, you know, be uncovered, and uh, the courts are most likely to reverse and release people in the state court system. So
Mhm.
we have taken all the work we've done is now pending before the appellate court. That appeal is now pending, and we have to see what they will do. The the weakness of where we stand now is procedurally, because our system in this country is set up to really discourage and prevent retrials or reexaminations of cases. And procedurally, you could make a strong argument that before I ever got in the case, that he was procedurally barred. And
Mm.
it's a question of whether the appellate court will take a very open view of the new evidence and will be troubled enough uh, by all of the errors that were made and the lack of experts that the defense had, that they will reopen the case, or
Yeah.
will they just shut it down procedurally? Because you could make a valid argument that, procedurally we're dead in the water.
Yeah. And in your experience, have you had similar cases where the court have said, well, yeah, we need to see more expert evidence that perhaps should have been called in the first trial?
Yes, absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's the way we've won most of our post convictions. We just got a reversal this week on a murder case. And yes, most often the courts are comfortable with new forensic evidence. That's what they feel is, then they're not having to go into, attorney malfeasance and all of that. It's an easy path for the court to take. But even with that, even when people are requesting new DNA testing, there are courts in the United States that have shut that down procedurally. So there's our Supreme Court, kind of the conservative branch of it, has just taken that really hard-nosed. It's kind of
Hmm.
the Scalia approach that, once it's done, it's done, with
Yeah.
the jury trial.
And in terms of doing things differently in the original trial, if you were Stephen's defense counsel in the original trial, can you tell us what you might have done differently?
Yes, there were several, and they've been very open, honest, and cooperative with me, the
Mm.
trial attorneys, about admitting, uh, that they kind of fell below the standard. There are two areas. One is, um, they did not have the right experts, and they didn't have enough experts. They pinned all their hopes on the EDTA uh, tube, and we were able to do very sophisticated testing that didn't exist back then, but to show that's a dead end. The blood did not come from those tubes. But they had, just failed to get a number of experts, DNA experts, um, testing different items, because there was so much evidence that was planted.
Yeah.
Um, but the second huge mistake was in their investigation. They had one investigator, I think a competent fellow, but they just absolutely dropped the ball on Stephen's nephew, Bobby Dassey. He was the star witness in the case. His brother absolutely contradicted and really, demonstrated that he was lying in his police statements. So we've had cases, certainly in the United States, where the star witness is the killer.
Right.
And
Okay.
so they needed to take a hard look at why he felt it was imperative for him to come up with this whole story.
Yeah.
And where was he, and what was his alibi, and what was going on in his life. And it was just a huge error because he was contradicted by his brother, and they missed that the brother had said no. He told me that she had left the property, and that was everything. That was the whole
Yeah.
case. So yeah, they did well in the courtroom. They were entertaining and all of that, but they lost.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, because, we've lost cases, that that's the reality. Like, we've got two cases now for retrial that other firms or lawyers handled. It's nothing personal, but if you
No.
lost, whatever you came up with didn't work. But so we lay out more than we ever have in a brief what we think their negligence, the trial attorney's negligence was. And I think they've been forthcoming that they just flat out missed stuff.
Yeah. And
You know.
in terms of the planted evidence, is one of the key parts there the key to the motor vehicle that was found days later on the
Yes.
property? Yeah.
Here's what's fascinating, I think, about the case, and it took, I mean, we just spent 2 years on it before we ended up almost three with the appellate court. So we just spent an enormous amount of time going over things. But what I came to realize was that evidence had been planted by the killer, and evidence then was planted by the police. So once the police believed that Stephen Avery had committed the murder, they
Hmm.
were able to justify planting the key, putting the DNA on the hood latch. Um, those items of evidence were planted by the police, but the blood of Stephen Avery in the vehicle was planted by the killer,
Okay.
not by the police.
Right. And in terms of, so that would be blood that would that be connected to the blood from that won't be connected to the blood from the tube?
No, it is
No.
not. We
No.
know the age. We were able to do testing and establish that the blood in the tube corresponded 100% with Stephen Avery's age. They told me with the DNA methylation, it was the blood of a man approximately 43 years old. It was not
Right.
the blood of somebody in their 30s or late 20s. So, no. And then everything had been misinterpreted with the tube and all that once I started talking to experts because I thought I could jump in the case and get an EDTA expert. But as soon
Yeah.
as I talked to those experts, and then when I was very fortunate to get the DNA methylation done, that was absolutely a dead end and not where the blood came from. Stephen Avery's cut finger was dripped into his sink. He made statements in the very beginning of the case that that blood had been removed before the police started their
Right.
investigation. So you knew it was a family member,
Yeah.
you
And
know?
someone with very close connections to
Very
Stephen.
close. And the other thing you knew was it was not the police because the police would not go into his trailer, see blood in his sink, and think, oh, I'm just going to remove it because it could have been the blood of Teresa Halbach, and they wouldn't have known that. The
Hmm.
only person that knew that was the blood of Stephen Avery was the killer because
Yeah.
he knew Teresa Halbach was never in the trailer. And
Yeah.
that was the key to it. So when we pieced that part of it, when we could rule out the EDTA tube and focus on the blood in the sink, and then Stephen in his audio interviews back in '05 is talking about the blood in the sink. So it wasn't a recent fabrication. He has said from the beginning
Hmm.
that blood was removed. And of course, the blood in the car, it was just tiny drips of
Yeah.
blood. So what happens in these cases, and there have been other examples, once the police believe, oh my God, he did do it, that is his blood, it's okay then in their minds to plant the key, all of that. But the killer also planted the bones.
Yeah.
The bones were tipped in from the Dassey burn barrel into Avery's burn pit.
Yeah.
So,
And is there was there tests that sort of had proven that the bones were
yes.
tipped in? Yeah.
Yeah, we got, I think, the leading forensic bone expert, fire expert in the world, John DeHaan, and he scientifically demonstrated that no human body could have been, nor was it, burned in Avery's burn or in his burn pit because of the heat that would have been required. It
Mm.
was
Yeah.
open air, the condition of the bones, and then he was able to very effectively, point to the bones in the Dassey burn barrel and demonstrate they had been tipped in from that burn barrel. They'd come from that. So the origin of where the body was and where it was burned was in the Dassey burn barrel, and the bones were then tipped into Avery's and dumped into the quarry.
Okay, thank you. One question we've had from social media is, did you ever get the original RAV for testing the car?
That's part of what's in dispute on the appeal. The RAV is in the possession of um, it's Detective Wiegert, where he's currently the sheriff. The RAV it's buried underground. in a cage. They
Right.
have a special container that they put it in. And I'd been in the case 24 hours when I called to confirm that the RAV was still intact, that it would be preserved. And we had an agreement with the prosecutors because they believed that new testing should be done of the RAV, and then the judge kind of really pulled the rug out from under us, despite the
Mm.
fact both sides had agreed to that. So the car exists. We can test it. We're going to bring a group of experts for both sides in and retest everything we could.
Okay. And is that going to happen, do you think, in 2021, or is that later down
As
the
soon
line?
as we get, I believe what will happen is we will get, the court will allow an evidentiary hearing and they will allow the additional testing. Um, if they don't, we're just going to keep refiling petitions at the lower court level, because there are just so many errors in the case.
Yeah.
It's an
And
endurance contest. You know, it's
yeah.
this kind of work is not for somebody that wants a quick fix and,
Hmm.
has very little patience. The key for the client and the key for the attorney is that you are incredibly tenacious and you persevere. And I think because we've won cases where nobody thought we had a prayer, um, it teaches you the confidence to know you're right and you will win. I mean, I tell people the first, uh, five, whoops, I think I
Yeah.
lost you.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cases that we've had where nobody thought we could win and we've won. And so you get where you really trust your own judgment.
Yeah. And that's what you feel with the Avery case. You have that
I,
confidence there.
I'm absolutely 100% sure that he's innocent. I'm 100% sure I know who the killer is and exactly how this happened,
Hmm. Okay.
you know.
Yeah. I won't push you on that one any further, although I'm dying to, absolutely dying to. So if and when Stephen is eventually released, do you think the officers involved in, and maybe Ken Kratz, Lenk Colborne, do you think they will be held to any form of account?
Well, I know that we would bring a civil rights case, so we would start there just like we have on these other cases. I believe that we will prevail on that. Things are evolving in this country. I mean, so far, only one prosecutor became a judge, has been, sent to jail, not for a very long period of time. But you can see now police officers on these shooting cases being charged with homicide.
Hmm.
I do think until we get to that point, we get rid of immunity, qualified and absolute immunity for, prosecutors have absolute immunity, and it's only if they're in the investigation do they lose the cloak of absolute immunity. Police officers have qualified immunity, but our U.S. Supreme Court is seriously, even the conservative wing, contemplating getting rid of those doctrines, and they should.
Yes, absolutely.
They
Um,
should.
One of the things that shocked me when watching the documentary was either the daily press conferences from the prosecution in particular. And I've spoken to Jerry and Dean about this, and they tell me that it's absolutely not the norm. Um,
Yes.
how could that not impinge Stephen's fair trial rights?
Yes, because I mean, the most egregious, just shocking thing, and what violates all the professional conduct codes is that Mr. Kratz gave a press conference on Brendan Dassey's
Hmm.
confession. I mean, that
Yeah.
was just so over the top, outrageous, just so, unfair. And I thought that was one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen. And ethics professors, I mean, we have affidavits in the post-conviction petition from law professors that teach ethics that was just a complete violation of
Mm.
his right to a fair trial. They
Yeah.
should have moved the case out of that area.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when watching
Terrible.
watching the case and not or watching the documentary, not knowing anything about the case in advance, yeah, I was shocked by that. I do have quite a technical question from Carla Black from Twitter, and she says, I would like to ask Miss Zellner if items A, M, and AN are still available for testing, and if you are interested in testing them, AM is a stained rock and AN was possible tissue. The crime lab states that both were not of human origin, however, both originate from the piles in the quarry areas that were hit on by the cadaver dogs.
I think in the world of testing, there's so many things that show that demonstrate absolutely that human bones are in the quarry. When you're thinking about testing, you don't just randomly test every item. You look at, would this advance the case? I think that we've conclusively shown human bones were in the quarry. Would I rule out testing those items? No. If we got the green light to retest, I would test everything that I could. Do I think that those items would definitively advance Stephen's case? I do not. Okay.
Yeah,
We know that Hallbach's bones, um, you know, uh, human bones are over in the quarry. But I'd just say in my list of items that I think are crucial, I would put that in the a second category. I mean, helpful, but not huge.
yeah. Okay. Louise Ebach asks, following the reward that was on offer for information, was there any sort of credible leads that came out of that?
Yeah, there have been.
Yeah.
And what I found, and going back to this Kevin Fox case, which I mentioned, the
Hmm.
reward offer by the family led to the apprehension of the real killer
Mm.
because the ex-girlfriend came forward to the FBI, um, and did collect the reward money. But that was the reason that it was done. I've seen it happen in two of our cases where it has led because someone else knows. Okay, there's the killer, and then
Yeah.
there's the person that they've trusted. And a lot of times those relationships break down. In our case, or it wasn't our case, but it's called the Brown Chicken case, where 7 people were murdered at a Brown's Chicken. Years later, 13 years later, the 2 ex-girlfriends came forward because they had DNA, but running it through CODIS, there was no link. So the reward caused them to come forward. So you have to be very patient. It's just like fishing. You
Yeah.
just leave the lure out in the water and
Yeah.
you work on other stuff, and then all of a sudden somebody comes. And in the Rossetti 4 case, it was the brother of one of the killers, but he came forward. He had known the whole time,
Mm.
and sometimes you think, why should they get the reward money? But it works. And
Yeah.
so, yes, we have gotten tips.
So in terms of this sort of fishing analogy, it's just waiting for someone's conscience to click.
Yes. And,
Yeah.
having seen people wait 13 years, people
Yeah.
wait 15 years, but eventually, um, I think if the killer and the killer's almost always confided in someone. In the Fox case, he didn't tell the girlfriend he'd done it, but he made comments about the
Hmm.
case that made her believe not only did he have no empathy for the family, but there was an arrogance about it. He never
Right.
confessed, but it was enough to get the FBI to him. And then
Yeah.
with the DNA, that that led to his confession.
Okay. Yeah. So hopefully, fingers crossed, in that this
Yeah.
someone will take the bait. In term, we've spoken a little bit about the scientific tests you're running and everything else, but are there any new tests that didn't exist in '05 that you're running now?
Well, I mean, I think state of the art was, the methylation, trying to sort out the issue about the blood. But DNA, like we delivered DNA samples this week on another case, that just the evolution of the DNA testing has allowed them with samples that would have been viewed as contaminated to get results. So we're in that world of being able to benefit, I think, from the evolution on DNA. Um, and I think, we did do a huge amount of testing. I think the most fascinating piece of evidence is the hood latch swab, because I'm convinced that they never swabbed the hood latch they took a groin swab, DNA swab from Stephen Avery. So they take him to the hospital and they've charged him on a weapons charge. Why
Hmm.
would you be taking DNA from someone and swabbing their stomach and groin area? They were trying to collect his DNA, and they did, and they had the swab, and then we see that there's monkey business, that the officer who drove the swab and turned it in was not the officer who had allegedly swabbed the rep. And that, to me, that's just such a huge piece of evidence,
Yeah.
because they were not confident about the blood in the car because it's so obviously planted, the smear
Yeah.
by the key. And so they needed that other piece. And the prosecutor needed that, and he was in on it because he kept
Wow.
talking about the hood latch swab.
Yeah.
He needed another piece of DNA evidence. Why would Stephen's DNA be on the hood latch? That story is so contrived. It's so
Yeah.
obviously fabricated. It's not, and we tested to see if it was blood, and it wasn't. It's skin cell DNA. It came off the groin swab.
Okay. Yeah.
So, you know,
It sounds odd. Yeah.
yes,
Um, Joe Doherty asks, do you think that any successful appeal for Stephen would have an impact on Brendan's case as well?
I do. Yeah, I think, Northwestern, they
Mm,
were, their focus was on the confession. And unfortunately, when they got into federal court, the U.S. Supreme Court has just done nothing about juvenile confessions for years, and because of the EDPA statute. But I believe with the investigation that we've done, if this appellate court believes that they've got the wrong killer and it's kind of obvious who the real killer is, just their sense of justice, they would want to undo this conviction, and that would lead to Brendan getting
yeah.
relief also. I think it's difficult for Brendan now to make any kind of move because his process is years ahead of where we are. We're where
Hmm.
Brendan was 10 years ago in state court. Stephen has huge possibilities, not only within the state court, if more evidence develops, if there's a confession or tip from someone else, but he's never gone into the federal system, you know? So we're years behind them. We're years ahead of them in terms of the forensic developments, but we're years behind in terms of having so many more opportunities than what Brendan has now.
Yeah. So whatever happens next, that's not going to be the last opportunity for Stephen.
No way.
No,
We're
no.
just, yeah, we're, the way we do this is I don't care how many petitions we have to file. I don't care about the procedural hurdles. The only way that he's ever going to get out is if the effort continues. So even on Ryan Ferguson's case, when we did the evidentiary hearing, the only witnesses in the case, the only two witnesses against him, took the stand, admitted they committed perjury, which would bring a life sentence in Missouri. The judge still ruled against us. As soon as we got the ruling, it didn't. I went back in my office and started drafting the appeal, and we
Hmm.
won, and he walked. So that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying about persistence. Yes, it matters what the appellate court does. We hope they go our way, but it in no way will deter us.
Okay. Thank you. Just two more questions before we finish up.
Sure.
In your opinion, what's the biggest problem facing the criminal justice system in the United States?
The biggest problem is that we have an old, antiquated system with tons of procedural rules that block an innocent man from getting relief. And those rules have been completely surpassed and are outdated because of the forensic developments, DNA. Because no one believed if someone was convicted, it was so rare for cases to get overturned. If they were overturned, it was on some procedural defect. You go back to the retry and they'd be convicted again. Nobody believed somebody could be innocent. They thought our system was so fair. And so we
Mm,
constructed these rules. It's just like the EDPA rule in federal court, and they're just out of sync and a terrible impediment for an innocent person.
yeah.
That's what's wrong. They need to overhaul the immunity stuff. They need to face the reality. There are a significant number of innocent people in prison that have been blocked and prevented from gaining freedom because of our outdated, antiquated system. And judges need to educate themselves, the trial judges. Um, we're working on a case now for a retrial, fortunately, a different judge, but it's just astounding the evidence, the ridiculous evidence that was let in to get a conviction. And then it got to the Supreme Court of Illinois and they reversed it. But it takes years for somebody to work through the system, and it shouldn't be like that.
No, no. Okay, I do have one final question before my
Sure.
actual last question. Do you know if there's going to be a third season of the documentary?
I don't know because it would be up to the filmmakers and probably what public demand was. I could see it going, either way. I don't know. I just keep my head down and keep working.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, thank you. And my final question, what would be the take-home message to the masses of Stephen supporters across the globe from this sort of chat?
the the message is that Stephen Avery is innocent, and if we have a fair and just legal system, he will be exonerated, um, and that they should never give up. And we have to persist, and hopefully we will break new ground. Already the case has caused so much attention in looking at the flaws in the justice system, um, but there's never a doubt that he's innocent. It's a question of will this legal system uh, allow him a new trial? Because I can promise you, if he has a new trial in a venue that isn't completely biased, he will walk out the door. He
Hmm.
will walk out the door. This evidence that was used to convict him will not stand up to scientific scrutiny. And these witnesses that were used against him, they'll never survive this time, They'll never survive it.
No. Well, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me today, and I wish you the very best of luck with
Yes, thank you so
the
much.
rest of this work. Thank you very
Yes,
much.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye-bye. Well, thank you, Kathleen, for taking some time out of your very busy schedule to talk to me today. It was an extremely interesting chat and shed light on the route forward in terms of Stephen's appeal case. Um, If you have any questions, as I said at the top of the show, please feel free to get in contact with me. My details will be on the credits at the end. I would also like to take this opportunity to show my gratitude to the people who have donated to the show via the Ko-fi link in terms of helping to keep this going and giving me support to carry on with these shows. This is all done in my free time, and it takes a great deal of time to arrange the interviews, plan them, and then carry them out. So I would like to thank Joe Doherty, Donna Jenkins, Lucy Green, and Claire Malone, who have all donated over the course of the last week. On next week's show, we are joined by Professor Gudjonsson, who is the leading professor and the leading light in the field of false confessions. So if you have a question for Professor Gudjonsson, please feel free to get in contact with me and I will put that to him. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Many thanks.